Hi, and welcome to Power the Network. I'm your host, Tim Locker, Vice President of Broadband here at CBM. You know, I say this a lot, but I truly do enjoy the opportunity to meet all these new folks through this podcast, and today is no exception. We've got another Iowa boy turned Kansan. He's going to be on with us, and we're going to talk about how to set yourself apart in the broadband network if you're a broadband provider. So let's get into our conversation today with Seth Thompson from Calix. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm glad to have you here. I'm excited to get to know you a little bit better. We've kind of passed each other in trade shows and et cetera. Seen a bunch of your content on LinkedIn. But other than that, I don't really know much about you. So I'm excited to have you here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. And like a lot of people, you probably know me as the headband guy for a while until
Can you
we
give us a
actually
good one to get
paths.
started? Can you?
What's up, friends?
There we go. What got you doing your Seth Talks on LinkedIn?
You know, it's interesting. This is over 5 years ago now, I suppose. And I was just a sales guy, doing normal sales guy things, and making the calls, sending the emails, trying to build relationships. I felt like I had a good message, but there had to be a way to take it wider. You know, you can only make so many calls, leave so many voicemails, and touch so many people that way. And right about the time I was having those thoughts, I got the chance to hear a gentleman named Marcus Sheridan speak in person, and his whole thing is content marketing. He wrote a book called They Ask You Answer. If you're interested in content marketing, definitely pick it up. Very, very good. But then got a chance to have lunch with them, sit right beside him at lunch as we had a group lunch after that. And I started thinking, I can probably do this. He's very focused on like company brand and marketing. I'm like, I can probably do this for myself. So I went out on a limb, posted a video on LinkedIn, and saw the response it got, and the rest was history. It was just kind of like, it wasn't even a valuable video at all, but I saw how many people engaged with it, how many people saw it, and I was like, okay, this might be a path. And so, it's 5 years later, and the video, the content stuff has definitely become a core part of who I am and what I'm doing.
Well, it definitely, got my attention, and I'm sure, probably feels a little silly at first. And but I mean, it's definitely catchy.
Yeah.
And it's gotten your name and face out there.
It is, it's opened more doors than I care to admit. So.
Yeah.
Not literally.
No, that's awesome. The podcast is starting, we're fairly new into this, but it's starting to kind of do a little bit of the same. Yep. So it's definitely important to, set yourself apart somehow from the competition. So I love your messaging though. You're always talking about, how do your customers, and, for those of you that don't know, most of our customers are in this space are, independent telcos, for example. And it used to be that if you just had fiber to the home, you're special.
Yep.
And that doesn't seem to be the case anymore. What are you telling your folks, your customers, how to set themselves apart?
Yeah, it's really interesting because you look at even the independent broadband providers, the co-ops, even the municipalities, and a lot of those folks that you and I are both working with, they were some of the first ones to bring fiber internet to their subscribers way before many of the big folks did.
Yeah.
And so for a long time, that was a differentiator, right? If they're competing with whatever large cable company or overbuilder might also be in the town or towns they serve, hey, we're fiber. This is great. Well, now fiber is really not that much of a differentiator, number one, because you may have other fiber players and they're overbuilding you. And number two, because speed is abundant regardless of technology at this point. And when speed, which is one of the primary advantages of fiber, when it's abundant, it's no longer a differentiator. So you have to find other ways to stand out. It's the same way I take this parallel back to buying a car. If you were to buy the first car, right, the Model T out there, well, if you found another car that could go 10 miles per hour faster, that was a big advantage.
Yeah.
And it kept going like that for a while until, well, all I need to do is go 80 miles per hour. And there's some people that would really like a Ferrari because they're really into that, but that's a small percentage of the population. Yeah. And so now you're not making a decision off of how fast does a car go? Can it get me faster from point A to point B? Every car can do that. You're making a decision off of well, am I a commuter? Do I have a family? Do I need the SUV with a third row? Do I want the leather seats, the entertainment system? How am I using this vehicle? And so, pulling that back to the broadband space, that's really what we're coaching our broadband provider customers to do. Look at their packages and their solutions, how they differentiate as how are your subscribers using your service, and then build value around that. And that's really, I think, Calix has positioned themselves well to do that.
So what little things specific in that bundle are there that when if I'm looking at a customer's usage, then what specifically am I trying to target them with?
Yeah, so you have to standardize it to an extent. So you're breaking it down to, hey, do we have, look at personas, right? You might have, this is just your average web surfer. They're not doing much. They're checking Facebook, checking their email. And then you might have a family that has both parents' devices, kids' devices. They're gaming, they're streaming. They've got work from home. They're educating from home. Okay, that's going to be a very robust package. A lot of stuff you can build into that. You might have MDU that has a certain type of user, right? Depending, your MDU tenant in Ames, Iowa might look very different than your MDU tenant in Colo, Iowa.
Sure.
So building packages around those type of things, a family package, if you're looking, hey, full-blown everything. We got all these devices. Maybe we need a little more bandwidth. Maybe that's where we get a gig or a multi-gig package. That's where we need things like network security. If you have a family, maybe you have a larger house, so you need mesh extenders, Wi-Fi extenders in there, things like social media monitoring, parental controls. But essentially baking all of that into a package and offering it as a bundle to take the thought out of it. Because reality is that family or that customer could go piecemeal all that stuff out. They could buy their internet from you. They could go directly to some parental control app. They could get some independent network security. That's so much to manage, and it's more than most people want to do. So the fact that you as the broadband provider can become the aggregator really that's pulling that all together, that in itself has value.
Yeah, and that service kind of goes in hand with that. I think our customers really outservice the competitors, the big companies and so on.
The way I look at that, because if you talk to a lot of our customers, our mutual customers, and you say, hey, what makes you stand out from the competition? A lot of them will lean on, our service, our customer service. Like we're reliable. These are just tangible ways to demonstrate that. Where, yes, if someone has an issue and they call in and you pick up the phone, that's awesome. But they've had an issue before they get to experience that, right? So how can you give them tangible things up front that are saying, listen, you can see the value day one in working with us?
I think some of that even just goes into the install process and the training. I laugh. My dad actually just signed up for a fiber to the home there in Polk City.
Yep.
And so he just signed up, and Monday, they come out to hook him up. And about 4 hours later, they finally got him trained on how the remote works, and so, I mean, you have to have the patience and work with folks like that. And I think our customers do a great job of that.
I heard that put a very good way from one of our customers in Iowa. The best tech and installer that a broadband provider can have is the compassionate nerd, right? Yeah. The compassionate nerd that gets it. They understand how things work. They can explain it, but they also understand that everybody else probably doesn't. And so they have that patience to walk them through it. I mean, and that is the prime experience right there, right? That's what you're looking for.
Yeah, that's going to keep those customers coming back forever.
Yep.
So you mentioned Iowa. You're born and raised in Iowa?
Born and raised in Iowa, yep. Lived there really my whole life until about 9-10 months ago. So
what part of the state?
So born on the east side of the state, Cedar Rapids, Iowa City area. Lived there my younger years through elementary school, and then what I would call home in Iowa was Adel, right outside of Des Moines, about 20 minutes outside there. And my parents lived there until about 3 years ago. They moved down here to Kansas City for a job opportunity for my dad. And for us, I have two small boys, and we had always had a goal to be close to family in some way. So before my parents had moved, it was, let's get back to Des Moines. Glad we didn't at this point, right? And then when my parents moved down here to KC, we still have some family around there in Des Moines, and we have some family in St. Louis, but was a little bit constrained by my job and territory at Calix, which was Iowa at that point, and strictly focused on the cloud side. And so when my now leader reached out to me and said, "Hey, how do you feel about Kansas?" I guess
Perfect.
a little over a year ago. This one I was like, "Well, I think I can make that happen," right? And it's been a whirlwind since, but it's been a fun transition down here. And it was really hard to leave those customers in Iowa because you build those relationships, and there are great folks across the industry, but I'm obviously partial to the folks in Iowa.
Sure.
And that was a tough decision. But coming down here, it's actually been really great for me professionally too, just to get exposure to some different broadband providers, different people, a new team here at Calix as well, and it's been really fun getting to know the territory and the people down here.
So, sometimes you don't plan it, but things just work out when you're on the right track.
Yeah, so. I've had this conversation with multiple people. Like, you don't get to pick when the opportunities come. You just got to take them when they do come.
Yeah,
right?
No, that's right. Now, I saw that you started in finance, and were you working with telcos, or how did you get into the telco industry?
I'll say this, and I'll tell anybody up front, not a finance guy, not a tech guy, worked in both the industries. So I got into commercial equipment finance right out of college. It would have been back in 2014. And it's essentially the company I worked for was a leasing company. So you think about, even in this building right here and offices a lot of our people work at, you don't typically go and just buy a copier machine, right? Typically you'll sign that and you'll pay a monthly lease and usage agreement. And that's just how it's always been done. So the company I worked for at that time, Great America Financial, they really made their business doing that. Got a great reputation in the industry. Moved in, and they kind of spread into different spaces like the managed service provider IT space, as well as the telecommunications space. When I say telecommunications, I mean actual physical phone systems, right?
Okay,
not necessarily what we're doing. And that's the part of the business that I came into, and that was my first exposure to, really the technology industry. So, got to know that, really building hardware as a service and devices as a service or rental programs. In the simplest sense, we were trying to help different telephone providers, people that were selling what were typically these big legacy boxes hosted or PBX systems, on-site PBX systems, that were moving to the subscription type model, but they still had some hardware involved that they had to go pay for up front. And it's like, okay, we'll finance that. We'll wrap it all up into one single monthly payment, make it easy for people. I did that at Great America for about 5 years, and then made a move to another finance company, and eventually figured out, hey, I want to pivot and where I'm at. And so, company that actually would have been a good prospect for me at that company. They were your typical IT VAR, doing some managed services now as well, but they're based out of Tampa. Came on with them, and they're like, hey, you're in Iowa. We know there's a ton of broadband providers in Iowa. The founder of the company had a lot of history in that space. We want you to call on these people. And that was kind of my introduction to the broadband space, right? So it's, no one ever plans, exactly how they're going to get where they are, but it's kind of one of those where, again, opportunity, you take it as it comes, and you roll with it. And from there, I was there for about a year, and then Calix had reached out to me. And the rest is history, right? I was happy with what I was doing and really enjoying it. But I had actually a few people from Calix reach out, and I was kind of, all right, maybe I should take this conversation. Yeah. So, but it's been a good thing. So,
that's awesome. So basically, that just kind of introduced you to the folks. You ran from there. And how long were you in Iowa with Calix then, before you went to?
It would have been about 2 years, maybe a little over 2 years. Now, again, just how it worked out. For about a year before that, I was calling on most of the same people with Imperium, and had quite a few people. I was a big process guy, very persistent. Got to know some people that way, but people didn't know the name Imperium. Most folks know the name Calix in the space that we're in, and so I switched over to Calix, and all of a sudden they start taking my calls. And they're like, probably owe you a call for about the last year, huh? Yeah. Hey, fair enough.
One of our guys, when you say persistent, we tell him the 13th time is a charm.
That's it. It's the truth.
He will knock your door down until you finally talk to him.
Yep.
And sometimes that's what it takes, But I've also seen it the other way, when you've got the big name on your shirt, and maybe you leave and go somewhere else, and I've seen where people think that it's me. It's
Yeah.
me that they want to be with, and well, I'm no longer with the big name, and
Yep.
all of a sudden it goes the other way. So,
Yep.
sometimes you got to have that perspective as well. But
Yeah, I think the interesting thing with that too, and that just goes back to what you and I do every day. Like relationships really do matter, and that's really a tell, right? Like how strong was your relationship? How much value were you bringing versus
exactly
maybe the organization you were with? And ideally, it's a good mix of both.
Yeah.
I think that's I coach our people on this all the time, and I'll say this to anybody, especially in this industry. Yeah, it's one thing for people to trust the Calix name or the CBM name and you as an organization, and they should trust that because we're doing things the right way. But what's really going to get stuff done is if they trust Tim or if they trust Seth, because inevitably things will go wrong at some point. Do I trust that Tim or Seth is going to go to bat internally to the powers that be that may or may not know my organization, my story, what's going on here, and why this is so important. I've seen that pay off over and over again because reality is a lot of folks won't, right?
Yeah.
And that's what separates the
maybe
good from
not
the
that
great.
they won't, but they simply can't.
Exactly right.
Or another.
Exactly right. Yeah.
And that's whether it's the individual or the company. But
exactly right. Yep.
What do you think is our biggest challenge today in broadband?
Well, this is a lot.
There's several.
Yeah, this is a lot of the conversations we have every day. I'll throw out the easy one, which is workforce, and that's, it's not just our customers, the broadband providers. It's folks like you and I too.
Yeah.
In our organizations, finding good people that are invested and want to be in this industry. That's definitely an issue.
The contractors trying to find enough folks to do it.
It's every part. It's contractors. It's vendors and suppliers that support the industry. It's the broadband providers themselves. When we talk to a lot of people and say, hey, what are your biggest roadblocks? Like, what's keeping you from going here? And they're saying, we just don't have enough bodies to run fast enough at this point. And we try to get on contractors, up in their queue, and like their queues are a mile long too. So it comes back to relationships there as well. Yeah. That's a really big one. And then obviously I think the funding is just a really interesting part of it because
I'm sure you guys are tracking that closely.
Oh, yes, we are. Yes. Yeah. Just like most in the industry, you have the public funding and the private funding, and you do have to look at them separately. Both are sources for our customers, but particularly with the public funding, you got to make the best that you can out of the situation, but there's a lot of factors that you can't really control or impact as a broadband provider, and so that's where we hear some frustration as, hey, the way this thing is built is not made for a company like us, even though they're saying they want companies like us to participate.
Yeah.
But I don't really have a good avenue to voice that and to really drive change there. Now, on the private side, it's a little bit different because typically you have direct relationships with those investors, but they're also driven by different things.
For sure.
And so as a broadband provider, you've got to be able to, number one, move at the pace and meet the items that they want you to meet out there. And also have to be sure that the way that company might want to drive you aligns with the culture that you want to have at your organization as well, because there may be differences there. So the funding piece is just interesting. There's just a huge push to get people connected. But I don't think if you're outside the industry in particular, you realize how much has to go into that. Number one, yes, how much money, but also the time, the manpower, the suppliers behind the scenes that have to make it happen as well. So glad that there's focus on it. Excited to see more development taking place and what that actually looks like and how it's executed.
There's a little bit of a concern, you go back a few years ago to, COVID hit and we had, the whole structure of the world changed and lead times were crazy.
Yep.
Getting materials was an issue. Right now it seems like we're in a little bit of a lull. I know we kind of oversold, little panic buying, when all the products weren't available. And so we're seeing a lot of inventory and they're kind of starting to go through and distributors are getting through some of their backload. But it also seems like customers are kind of waiting a little bit for some of these funds to develop.
Yes.
From a lot of our manufacturers are a little concerned Do you think there's going to be another explosion like we had a few years ago, or is it going to be different?
There'll definitely be a pop. I don't know if it's going to be what it was a few years ago. Now, I think if you look at what it is right now, you're right. And everybody in the industry, it's almost like everybody's kind of on edge waiting for things to happen. And I will say the state broadband offices in particular and the NTIA have done a good job of at least like laying out some timelines on when to expect and what to expect. But so much of it is just still that gray area where people aren't quite sure when things going to happen because, hey, just because you can bid on something doesn't mean it'll be awarded. And then once it's awarded, from our perspective, doesn't mean things will be ordered right away.
Yeah.
And then from that point, you still actually have to go construct the network and connect the people. Now, what I come back to, and I think with BEAD in particular, it's an awesome program and a great opportunity. The execution of it is going to be critical on how many people actually get connected. If it's a good, reliable service that can be there for a long time, but that's also going to push down to folks like us that are working with customers on that. And what type of customers are going to get that funding? Right? Is it going to be a lot of the big cable companies out there? Is it going to be the independents and the co-ops? Is it going to be the wireless players? We just don't know. And that's totally state to state on how it's going to be executed. And that will impact what it looks like for a lot of us too, because I even know that it's a blessing and a curse that they've pushed the execution of the states. But you have somebody that's on a border town in Kansas or a few minutes away, and they might want to bid on stuff in Kansas and stuff in Missouri, but they've got two distinctly different sets of standards and processes that they have to follow. And that makes it more expensive and it makes it more complex to do. And talking about how it impacts a lot of our folks that are the independents and co-ops, that's much more difficult for them to manage than it is, say, somebody that's a large national player with 1 million+ subscribers out there, right? You just don't have the administrative and the back end staff to do that.
So if you get anything out of this episode, just remember that we work in several different markets. We've got expertise in many areas. And if we don't, we've got the relationships to find the answers that are right for you. We go really deep with our relationships, and that's really what we value here at CBM. If we can be of service to you, please reach out, cbmrep.com. One of my concerns, and I think we've seen it just through some of the programs in the past, but one of my concerns is really, are we building networks to last? I surely hate to see our tax dollars go to rebuild stuff that we've done already, and there's already some of that going on. Most of what we do is outside plant stuff, so cable enclosures and boxes and all that kind of stuff. So, but what types of things do you guys do from an electronics type of provider? What do you guys do to ensure then that scalability or being able to support things in the future?
So, and this is something we have a lot of pride in at Calix that we do maybe a little differently than some folks. Calix has gone through a conscious effort, before I was there even to now, to really scale down the number of SKUs that we have, and the SKUs that we do have, making them much more scalable. So making it so it's very software driven, right? We've disaggregated the software and the hardware layers so that you look at like our access technology or even our Wi-Fi devices that are in there. We push out quarterly software upgrades so that, yes, we can fix bugs and stuff like that, but also new features that want to be rolled out. Or if there is a new system or new technology that needs to be put out there, take, for example, our XG801 card. It's both a GPON and an XGS PON card, depending on how you configure it, optics you put in it, and stuff like that. And that's one example, right? But you look at it, eventually it'll come out and it'll be 50 gig and everything else. And yes, we'll have a new card for that, but it's still going to run on the common software operating platform. Yeah, you'll have the same chassis and everything else out there that is running our E9 platform, I'm guessing right now. So that's a really big thing for us. And it's interesting, you talk about the life of technology. Yes, technology standards change, but stuff still works. I mean, we still have people that are pulling old Occam B6 cards out of commission, right? Which have been around for 15, 20 years. And so that's really incredible to see. And I don't know that every technology provider or platform provider like us behind the scenes takes that stance, right? If it's every product has its own chassis and operating platform and everything else like that, that's not super scalable, because as technology advances, hey, it has to be a total rip and replace where, this can be, number one, a little less intrusive, both for the broadband provider and the customer. And that's the goal, right? To build networks that can last.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And that, like I said, that's one of my bigger takeaways from what I've just seen in the last 10 years, is, we're building stuff that we've already built, and that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But, a lot of people I take for granted. I live in Slater, so, and I've mentioned this before, but Huxley Telephone, built one of the first fiber to the home networks, right in my little town. So, to me, I'm a little jaded. What's the big deal, right?
Right.
We've always had great service. So, but it's interesting to see how that's changed even in the last 20 years.
Yeah.
But to your point, it still works.
Yep.
They do stuff differently now, but everything that they put in place, in 2002 is still
running, right?
Still rolling on good. But let's take another direction here. I noticed you had mentioned you've been through some Dale Carnegie training.
Yeah. Yep.
When did you do that, and would you recommend that for?
Yeah. So I did that, and that was, maybe 2 or 3 years out of school when I was at Great American. I'll say, too, Great American was a great place to start my career as really a young, really green, not even a sales professional at that point. I wasn't anything, right? They took me in at nothing and did a great job of putting me through some very structured sales training, things like Dale Carnegie as well. And I'm a big reader, too, so read some of his books after the fact, actually. But, yeah, I'd absolutely recommend Dale Carnegie. It's interesting, and I'm a huge person on just personal development and growth anyways. That was obviously a very structured way to do it. But I think professionally for all of us, we've got to be willing to invest into ourselves and see, okay, who do I need to become to go where I want to go? Because reality is you probably cannot do that as the person you are right now. And if you are, right,
otherwise you'd be there, right?
Exactly right. You would be there right now. And Dale Carnegie was a great avenue to really start exposing me to that too. Like, number one, interacting with people, conflict resolution, being able to communicate with emotion. These are all things that, naturally come to some people, but for a lot of folks, it takes intent, right? You have to intentionally say, hey, here's how I want to communicate this. And as you do it more and more and put that intention behind it, it becomes more natural, but it's an acquired skill.
Take some of that emotion out of it. And
exactly right.
And eliminate some of the issues.
Yep. So
a friend of mine went through and actually went to the point where he's actually a trainer.
Okay.
As well. And, as long as I've known him, we've been buddies since high school, but I could see a definite change in his direction.
Yep.
From the day he started that to where he's at now.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and the thing with Dale Carnegie or any course like that, any book you read, it's great to take the course, it's great to read the book, but so much it comes back to actually implementing it into your life. Like you said, people will notice a difference only if you take what you have, right? Like, you can starve with a steak dinner right in front of you if you don't eat it. I mean, it's just reality, right?
Yeah. We recently just went through a sales training class, and even as long as I've been doing it, there's plenty of things I can do better.
Yep.
And just taking the steps day to day, write the plan, and do what you need to do, incorporate it.
Yep.
And it'll change.
Yep.
So you've taken these different trainings, the Dale Carnegie, the sales trainings, et cetera. How do you implement that into your day-to-day sales to actually help your customer?
Yeah, well, we talked about this a couple minutes ago, but so much, especially in this industry, is very relationship driven, and people they're thirsty, right, to know more. How can I improve my business? How can I change things? For me in particular, I get the opportunity, as do you, to go and have conversations with not just this broadband provider in front of me, but the other 40, 50, or 200 if you're in Iowa across the state. And so you get a lot of different perspectives and you start identifying themes at that point, right? And something that I think anybody that works in the space can probably tell you, we've got a lot of really solid networks built, especially among the independents and co-ops. They do it the right way. but they're built, and a lot of them are led by very network technology focused individuals. And things like marketing can be left as an afterthought, because we talked about earlier, right? Before it was like, we're fiber. Come to us because we're fiber. That was your marketing shtick, where now so much of it comes down to educating your customers on why the fiber is better than the other technology, why our solutions and our service is better than the other providers out there. And to do that, we really have to break it down. We need to speak our customers' language. Our broadband providers need to speak our customers' language. It comes back to, how are they using your service? What matters to them? Well, maybe it matters to them that, if mom's upstairs on a Zoom call and, hey, son or daughter downstairs has a snow day and they're playing games on the Xbox, well, that Zoom call is not going to buffer, right? Speaking to that, speaking to Netflix not buffering, speaking to having a safe household if it's that you have kids in the home, speaking to network security, especially among older folks that might be that surfer or streamer. We know that, when you talk about cyber threats in particular, who is extremely vulnerable? Well, kids and older adults. Why? Because they click on everything, right? It's like something pops up on the iPad. It's just click, 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 click. You're like, oh, it went away. It's good. Like, no, now there might be a bad guy in your network. But speaking of those things, because those are situations that people can identify with. When you talk about marketing as a broadband provider, speaking their language comes down to putting together packages and putting together marketing content that makes people look at and say, oh, that's me. They do identify with it. Or, yes, I've been in that scenario before. So I think that's really, really important. And again, going back to what we mentioned about a lot of the leaders of some of the broadband providers might be more network focused. The biggest difference, because if everybody's built a solid network, the biggest difference that I've seen in broadband providers that really take off and grow and ones that don't, if you have a really, really good invested marketer, it can make all the difference, because you've got the solid network there. You've got the great products and solutions. So having somebody that can tell your story, that people in your community can identify with, that's huge. It's no different than why do people, pay an exorbitant amount of money for iPhones? And I'm guilty. I got 2 of them sitting in my pocket right now, actually, one for work and my personal one. Why? Because it works and it's easy. I can identify with that brand, and it doesn't make me work for the things that I know matter to me. It's just there. Yeah. So creating that similar experience in your broadband packages, I think, is huge.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. I'm glad you mentioned personal growth, and you mentioned you read a lot about books. What's the next book that I need to read?
Yeah. My first recommendation to anybody, whether it's like, hey, I haven't read this, or especially I read this when I was a relatively new grad, and it was deeply impactful. The book, The Slight Edge, by Jeff Olson. And to me, it's just such a big one. And I think the reason it resonated for me, because I'm a big process guy, I mentioned that before. He spends a couple hundred pages essentially talking about how big changes don't come in some big sweeping event. It's typically doing the little things right over and over and over again, right? Day in and day out, and these little daily disciplines. And that's actually, reading that book was one of the things that plugged me into becoming more of a reader. I didn't read, I read some growing up, but I got out of high school and whatever, wasn't interested in it. Maybe read a little bit in college, but really got into personal development in particular. And I read every day now, right? At all times, I have both a hard copy book, and then I've got an audiobook going, because I spend enough time in the car.
Sure.
And I used to be an anti-audio book guy too, until I started doing it, and I was like, this is pretty good.
You still get you're still feeding your brain with the right info.
Exactly right. But with The Slight Edge in particular, he breaks it down into daily disciplines, whether it's about personal development, if it's financially, if it's growing yourself at work, growing your family, growing your faith, whatever it might be that's important to you. Hey, pull the one thing that you can do every day that will move you forward. Commit to doing that, right? It's not a big thing.
Incremental progress.
Exactly right. And he boils it down, make it something so small. Like for me, personal development in particular, I read 10 pages every single day, without fail. Now, occasional fail, sure, right? But you do your best to make that a non-negotiable, just in the same way that with the LinkedIn stuff, I made it a non-negotiable part of my day 5 years ago to post something on LinkedIn. Yeah. Right. And like I said, there's always times that, hey, maybe I missed something, or whatever else. But when you start making that a priority, it's amazing how you start seeing that make a difference to you.
That's how many people, 20 years later turn out to be an overnight success.
It's exactly right. Yeah, it's exactly right.
Those little changes.
I boil that down to looking at the people that I look up to that have been very successful. And I mentioned it a couple times. It's not by accident, right? People don't just, I think there's, especially among younger folks, go into, maybe they graduate college or they get in with high school and they go into the workforce and they just expect like, well, I'm going to show up to work every day and do the things that I need to do. And then naturally I'll progress and get where I want to be. That's not how it happens.
Yeah.
Right. It's just not. It might take you a little bit to find that out. Luckily, reading and getting some experience under my belt, I found that out pretty quick. But I figured out,
got to be intentional with
you
that.
have to be very intentional, right? Because life happens and it's going to pull you 50 different directions. And the things that you prioritize will, they'll take priority, and that will dictate where you go. In that book in particular, Slight Edge talks a lot about these things are little, right? It's very easy to read 10 pages a day. It's also very easy not to read 10 pages a day.
Exactly.
It's very easy to go on a 15-minute walk. It's also very easy not to go on a 15-minute walk.
Yeah.
So just saying, I'm going to put in the little amount of effort to do that because that's what I told myself I was going to do. I mean, that's turned out to be a really good thing for me in my own growth and development as well.
Well, and a win is a win, regardless of how small.
Absolutely.
It still puts you in the right direction.
Yeah. I can remember, and just to illustrate that, my freshman year, baseball, actually freshman year of high school, I think I hit like my first home run. And like, it's one of those where you hit the ball and you take off running. And like, I wasn't a power hitter, but went over the fence. You see them sitting there doing it. And you're like, oh, so I asked somebody in the dugout, I'm like, oh, how far did I go over by? He said, it doesn't matter. It went over, right? Yeah. So which means it went over by like that much.
Yeah.
Obviously, but
hey, it's one more.
It doesn't matter.
My baseball career ended in 7th grade. I remember distinctly. I'll never forget. I'm at Nighthawk Field in Slater. I'm up on the mound, middle of the 2nd inning. The coach from the other team hollers out to the batter. He says, "Hey, watch the changeup. Every pitch is a changeup." And I'm like, "Coach, that's all I got. I'm gassing out here." And so he's like, "Oh, sorry, kid." But I'll never forget. And that's awesome. When I knew. And baseball was my family's history.
Yeah.
I mean, we're known for being ball players, but I missed that one. So
every pitch changeup, right? I like
every pitch is a changeup. So you mentioned going on a walk every day. How much is exercise part of your life?
Yeah, well, walking needs to become more a part of it, but I've always been a bit of a gym rat. Since high school sports and everything like that, was in the weight room, and I played a year of college baseball before I transferred back to University of Iowa. Always had the competitive edge in me, and I spent one semester just kind of like, all right, how do I feed this? What do I do? And I was fortunate to find the powerlifting club had just started at Iowa like the semester before. So it was like, okay, I'll get involved in that. I think there was like 5 other people in the club at that point, and was really fortunate actually that the folks that started the club, one of them went on to be an all-time world record holder, right?
Oh, wow.
The strongest, 148 and 165 pounder in the world ever at that point in time, which was insane. And a lot of other really strong guys and gals that were nationally ranked. And, I was a mediocre powerlifter. Like, I'll state that up front. But I became more of a powerlifter than I ever would have had I not spent that time around them. It was 2-3 times a week. We do group training sessions. And actually, we didn't do the same training either. It wasn't that, hey, you do a set and I do a set or anything like that. We all had our own training that we structured the way we thought was best. But just being around those people, having the conversations that wouldn't have happened otherwise, having that support, and then we'd go compete together and do the meets together. That was huge. And, that was back in, 2011, 2012. And, I still compete occasionally. At that point, it was a few times a year. You get older, like we talked about earlier, life happens. I got some kids now. I travel a fair amount for work. And I might compete every couple of years now at this point, and it's still fun to go push myself. But it's been a really good thing for me. And talking about process, I'm a process guy. That's another area I've seen it pay off over and over and over again. So I'm still, I might not be training for a meet or a competition particularly all the time, but I'm still in the gym 4 to 5 days a week, typically weight training. Have to do a little more of the walking and riding the bike now, because got to keep your heart healthy too. You can't just have big, strong muscles. But
well, how important is it to start that when you're young?
Well, for me, it was just such a habit thing. Because yes, a habit, but also it became part of my identity. Right. And that just ingrains it. Just like I'm the headbang guy on LinkedIn. Yeah. I don't know if I could ever stop that, because I'm the headbang. And more people probably said
what I do.
It becomes part of your identity in the same way. That physical fitness and exercise kind of became part of my identity. And what I realized too, it wasn't necessarily that powerlifting became part of my identity. That's certainly part of my life. But just the idea that I need to take care of my body and I can build it to do what I want it to do. That's going to be different things at different points in my life. Like right now, I don't need to be the absolute strongest I've ever been. I still want to be strong, but I need to be able to get up and down off the ground with my kids and chase them around and coach teams and do everything that entails as well, right?
As I'm aging, I feel like flexibility is getting to be more important than strength, or will at least allow you to use your strength.
Absolutely right.
Currently, I'm in a little bit of a mix on where I fit in the fitness world. What I do love about it is it really puts your head in the right spot.
Yeah.
You can have the worst day, the worst week, whatever it is, but you go in, you get a good workout, and like it all disappears. It's just amazing how it clears your head.
The way I look at that, your life and everything happening in it can be crazy, whether it's work, it's family, it's whatever obligations you have. For me, again, being meathead, I spend a lot of time on the weights in particular. Man, 45 pounds, it's always 45 pounds, right? Yeah. It's just what it is. That's one thing that I know I can count on to be consistent. Even if 45 pounds doesn't feel like I did yesterday or today, it is 45 pounds, right? Yeah. And that's my body giving me feedback on how my body is reacting, how it feels or doesn't feel. So that's been a big thing. Like no matter how great things are going or how crummy things are going, it can pick you up, it can humble you, but it's always the same, right? It's not because it changed, it's because something about you changed, right? Yeah. It's a point of feedback.
It's a great way to look at it. Yeah. I started in a CrossFit gym last May or so, and so that's why I say I'm in a little bit of a mix of where I'm at, because that's altogether different for me. Yeah. So when you say humbling, I know exactly what you mean. Yep. There's always somebody that's going to lift more than you. There's always somebody that's going to do better than you, but you just have to be able to put your ego aside. Yep. And just give it your best and see what you can do. So
absolutely,
I've enjoyed that. Traveling is hard though.
That's
how do you mix that into your work schedule when you're on the road?
Well, I'll say a couple ways. Number one, I do my best when I travel to find a gym, not just a hotel gym that I can go to, because again, powerlifting, you can't just do with dumbbells and stuff you might find in a hotel gym. So if I can find a good gym close, I try to get over there, pay the guest fee or whatever it is. Actually, the gym that I'm a member of here in KC has locations all across Kansas, which has been a good thing. But it's also forced me to adjust some of my training and my goals as well, because sometimes it is, I just need to get something in. It doesn't have to be perfect or what it is, for the exact reason you said. Number one, keep my body functioning, but to keep my mind right too, and priorities. I've just realized what I do and what you do and a lot of folks in this industry, demanding work. But
it's a balancing act.
Exactly right.
You talked about, all those different aspects of your life, whether it's your religion or your work or your family or your money, all those areas of improvement, it's a spinning plate. You've got to keep that thing balanced.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, coming back to what I mentioned before about the powerlifting, competing there. Hey, when I had training and work and my wife, I didn't have kids at that point. It's like, this can take up a lot of my time and be a big thing. It can be a priority. and those priorities just shift. Again, you have priorities change. You have other people, other things that come into your life too. It's just by nature, you make a decision that like, this is important. I really like it, but it's not as important as my family, right? Or maybe my job is more demanding now, and that's more important. If you asked me 10 years ago, maybe I wouldn't have said that. I don't know, but
there's always another job out there.
That's right. That's right. But will you be able to deadlift 600 pounds forever?
Yeah. Come on.
But that's been an interesting thing, and this is just even the last probably 6 months. I've had to make some adjustments to how I train, the goals that I have for myself, and also just coming to realization of like, hey, I'm 32 now. My body reacts a lot different than it did at 22, so I can't treat it the same way. Going into the gym and acting like a maniac and expecting to recover the same way. So, it's been interesting, but it's been a really good thing too, because seeing that extra bandwidth freed up to focus on the things that I am trying to prioritize has been really, really rewarding. So,
and what you learn from it, you set your mind to it. You did X, Y, or Z, and you see the results.
Yep.
And so then you can tackle whatever's next.
Exactly right. Yep.
Yeah. Well, awesome. Well, I guess we're going to wrap this up here this morning, but thank you so much for coming in. It's been great getting to know you a little bit better.
Yeah.
I love all your content. I know you're going to keep doing it, so keep putting it out there. And congratulations to your customers, because I know you take a great care of them and you do what's right for them. So
I appreciate that, and thanks for having me on here. It's been a lot of fun.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks again for joining us today on Power the Network. If you haven't followed Seth on LinkedIn, you can find him there. Make sure and see his daily Seth Talks. I think they're great. He brought up the fact today that, fiber is not the only differentiator anymore. You have to have, you got to come up with new creative ways to set yourself apart, because frankly, almost everybody's got fiber now, so it's not the only thing. If you need a creative way, to help set yourselves apart from your competitors, look out to Seth and reach out to us here at CBM. You can get a hold of us at cbmrep.com. And thanks for joining us on Power the Network.